I just want to talk to you a little bit, kind of thinking out loud, talk about what I see potentially happening. Tim Worley in his thing is talking about some of that entitled attitude, and he even talked about how the media and others are starting to refer to coaches as like Nick and Kirby, and how you never would have heard anybody go into a meeting and say Vince or Paul or anything like that, talking about that familiarity and how that's breeding a culture. And so he's saying you didn't refer to coaches by their first name. You always call them Coach whatever, Coach Bryant. So it's a very interesting article, and like I said, I'm going to dig a little deeper into it. But what it brought up was something that was also mentioned on Inside the Locker Room yesterday, and that's the players playing in the bowl games. Now, listen, Coach Saban himself said that these bowl games are going to become meaningless with the college football playoffs. Okay? And even C.J. Watson, who's a regular part of the Blitz and comments and contributes and calls in and comes sit in as co-host and different things, even talked about how the Sugar Bowl now, James, for SEC schools, because we've been so good that for SEC schools, you kind of lose your way into the Sugar Bowl versus play your way into the Sugar Bowl, unless it's the national championship game or the college football playoffs part of that cycle. You're kind of losing your way into that game, and how it's been kind of an embarrassment and things like that. So are bowl games meaningless? What's your thought? Are bowl games really meaningless? We're just thinking out loud. We're sitting around at the house. We're not on the radio. We're not on the airwaves. We're just sitting around talking. Just me and you, just good old boys just sitting around. Are bowl games meaningless? Are they meaningless?
Are the bowl games becoming a lot like what the NIT postseason wise is for college basketball?
I guess that's what I'm saying. Are they meaningless? Because would you say yes or no, James? Would you say bowl games as a whole are becoming meaningless?
As a whole, yes.
Okay. So if you're 3-7 and you have 2 games left in the season, are those last 2 games meaningless? What's the purpose of playing the last 2 games of the season?
And basically, you're playing out the schedule if you already know that you're not making any sort of postseason.
But aren't they meaningless then?
Right.
So if you don't play in bowl games because they're meaningless, when will the first player, James, decide not to play in a regular season finale or the last 2 regular season finales, or if his team is 1-7 or 1-6 and he knows that they have no chance of playing and winning, they're not going to go on a 5-game win streak and get to 6-6. So those last 5 games are meaningless. So when is a college player going to decide that I'm not going to play in those games? Because even though I'm on a really bad team, I am a legit first rounder. My NFL career is on the line when I go out and play those games. So when is that going to happen? Because once you start this, once you start deciding that you're not going to play to protect your NFL career, and listen, I'm not, guys, I'm thinking out loud. I'm not saying I agree or disagree at this point. I just want us to start thinking about this conversation, because when you start doing that, it's sort of like you move the line, you move the marker, and where does the marker stop? It's sort of like with morality. Once one person says, okay, that's okay, but I'm not gonna go. Then the next person that comes along and says, well, they said that this is okay. So the next person moves the line a little bit further, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So the question is, where do you stop?
You want to take a little trip back a couple of years ago to hear what Nick Saban had to say about this?
Yeah, because he made a statement years ago when the college football playoffs was announced. He mentioned something about the bowl games. Did he have any idea? Did he mean what I'm talking about? In some ways, I think he did. Here's what Coach Nick Saban said about bowl games when the college football playoffs were announced.
Well, I mean, I don't answer hypothetical questions, so, you're asking me a hypothetical question, but I will say this. I think when we created the playoff, which all you wanted to do, and all you wanted to make it 4 teams, and now all you want to make it 8 teams, and then pretty soon all you guys are going to want to make it 16 teams. And the only focus is on the playoffs. But when we all started this, however many years ago it was, I said that you're going to diminish the importance of other bowl games in college football, which has happened. That has happened. All anybody talks about is the playoffs. We have a whole bunch of other bowl games that, people don't think are all that important. So if you don't think it's important, all of a sudden some players don't think it's important. So you can't really blame the players. We created this. Okay, we created this. It used to be to go to the Rose Bowl was like when you played in the Big Ten, that was the ultimate of any experience that you could ever have. If you played in the SEC, going to the Sugar Bowl was that same thing. If you played in the Big 12, it was going to the Orange Bowl. So those things don't exist anymore. We have a playoff. Everybody's interested in the playoff. Nobody's interested in anything else. So now that that's trickled down to players, how can you blame the players for that? I can't blame the players for that. I think what every player has to decide, and what I would say to every player, is I think every player probably benefits from playing really, really well. So I think when you play in big games and you play really, really well, I think that enhances your value as a player. That's what I think. Now, every player would have to make the decision between, is that more important relative to protecting yourself? I think that's every player's choice, and that's every player's decision, and I don't know that there's much more to say about it than that.
And that's Coach Nick Saban talking about it making the bowls irrelevant. And only point I disagree on that is you can't blame the players. Yes, you can. You can blame the coaches. You can blame the administration. You can blame NCAA. You can blame BCS. You can blame college football playoffs, etc. But here's the thing. Why didn't this happen when it was the BCS? When it was the BCS, there were only two teams playing. Now you have more teams with an opportunity to play. So what's the difference? What's the difference? And I believe that it's twofold. I believe it's part of the coaches, but I also believe it's in our entitled mentality as a society. Now listen to me carefully. Listen, I'm not begrudging anyone who makes a decision, whether it's Nick Bosa, who was injured and decided after being injured for a couple weeks, no matter what happens, I'm not coming back because I'm a first-round draft pick. That's his prerogative. He has a right to do that. But he was injured. But how many of you remember Jadeveon Clowney, who lost money by playing his junior year? He would have been drafted as high or higher if he didn't even play his junior year. And if the definition of not playing in a game is about it being meaningless, then a lot of games are going to become meaningless. When you're on a sorry team that has no chance of ever making it to a college football playoff, why play as a junior at all? Why not just go train and get drafted? Because the NFL are taking these guys. The NFL don't see anything wrong with a guy not finishing out his season because it's meaningless, whether it's a bowl game or not. I mean, could you imagine not playing in the Sugar Bowl if you're one of us old hands because you weren't playing for a national title? Every bowl game I played in, with the exception of the national championship, truthfully wasn't for a national title. But none of us thought about not playing with our team. And here's my problem. Not only that, Here's my problem. Okay, coaches, if a guy decides not to play, now this is my opinion. The other part about whether a guy decides to play or not, I'm leave that up to them. But my point in thinking out loud today is this. If it's about meaningless games, how far will that bar move? It's now at the regular season. I mean, it's now at the bowl game. But when is it going to become that my record is so bad that I know I'm going to be an NFL first rounder because I'm dominant but I play at a bad school? When is a guy from like a team like Arkansas this year that's a offensive lineman that's a first rounder just going to back out on his team the last couple of games of the season because the games are meaningless? They're meaningless. But when you take that, let me tell you something. The one thing that I don't get about these coaches, and this is why I say you can blame the coaches, why in the world would you let that kid stand on the sideline with your team? Oh, you don't want to play with us? You don't show up in an Alabama uniform and stand on or an Alabama gear on that game. Now, you're welcome to be an alumni. You come to me, I'm the head coach at the University of Alabama, Georgia, wherever, and we're not playing in the college football playoffs, and you tell me because you going to the draft, and that's just like Saban said, he believes that every player can benefit by playing well in the game. I agree. But if you decide not to play, here's what conversation we're going to have. Mr. James Hardy, I understand you're looking for your NFL, and I'm not going to tell you what to do or not to do. But here's what I am going to tell you to do. You will always be welcome as an alumni here. But for this game, for these practices, you're not on this team. And I believe you become a distraction. No. You will be a distraction. So I'm going to ask that you not travel to the bowl game with us, that you not be on the sideline with us. But you're welcome as an alumni, and that's what you are now. And alumni don't come to meetings. They don't come to I'm sorry, you're not going to get a pass in this game. I watched several times this year bowl games where guys were on the sideline talking to guys who decided not to play and not being focused on the game. I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, you may agree or disagree. All I know is now that has started to happen, Miles Jack was a guy who was injured and didn't play his entire junior year and was still a second-round draft pick. Guys, I'm telling you, it's going to start to ease back into the season where guys don't play down the stretch. And after that, you're going to see consensus first-round draft picks not play their junior year. I mean, they're just going to say, I mean, what Nick Bosa is right now, James, Nick Bosa is still considered to be the first pick of the draft. And he played, one game this year? Maybe two? So what's the difference in him just not playing and training and getting faster and stronger and working on agility? What's the difference? There is not going to be any difference, and that's where football is headed. So I could go on with that. If you want to come in on it, 205-342-9904. But the definition of why guys aren't playing in the bowl games has far-reaching consequences. And they're saying it's not – when they say it's meaningless, it means to them it's not going to help them go to the NFL or be drafted any higher. As a university, playing in a bowl game gives you 12 to 15 more practices. So it's not meaningless for your university. And if your players don't believe in playing every time they step on the field, you got a bigger issue that you need to address. So anyway, I could go on, but I guess I better get the break here. I know I tried to end up I had to get the break, but thinking out loud, I got to say one more thing. This is not volleyball. This is not tennis. I'm sorry, I used it. This is not tennis. This is not golf. This is a team sport. It's a team sport. And in leadership, there's something anytime someone brings me in to talk about team, I always talk about what the 4 letters stand for. Together, everyone achieves more. That's what team is. And the underlying problem with this is selfishness and corporate sponsorship. Those two coming together is driving this. And Virgil even called it this entitled generation. And here's the thing. Think about a guy who's been playing running back all year, having a great year. But say what happens when an offensive lineman decides he's not going to play in a bowl game to protect his future, but the running back who's having a great year, his stock value is on the rise, but he hasn't quite got there yet. This guy's decision not to play now impacts his teammates and his brother. And there's a scripture that says, think more highly of others than you do yourself. Well, that's out the window with college football and the NFL draft and so on and so forth. And so, once again, together everyone achieves more. When these guys sit out, yes, they help their stock, but they hurt potentially all the other teammates that, by the way, help their stock get there. DeAndre Brown, Baker, whatever his name is for Georgia, is a really good player, but he was a really good player because he was surrounded by 10 other good players. But when he sits out, he now exposes his teammates. So, yeah, okay. And he definitely wouldn't be on the sideline. Get him off the sideline. Get out of here. You don't want to play in this game? Fine. Go home then. And then you can come back and visit us afterwards, but not during the game. You wouldn't be there. I'm sorry. James, I'm going to just hold that conversation. I'm going to go ahead. Man, this is just, I don't know. I guess
you had to get it out.
Yes, because I've been thinking about this the whole bowl season, and wasn't going to really address it, but we're going to hold that audio from Brad Edwards that was on with Ryan Fowler the game. We're going to hold it to after the recruiting conversation. We'll start. One of the key matchups for Alabama and Clemson is the O-line, D-line, and one of the things that our O-line, I believe, can do that very few teams that Clemson has played can do. Our D-line, I may have said our O-line, but our D-line can do is generate pressure. And Brad Edwards talks about what that means to Trevor Lawrence. We're gonna save that audio for the fourth quarter. We're gonna go ahead and get the break here so we can go ahead and get Hank South on. And as we go to break here, I'm just trying to point out to you guys, things start to roll downhill. And without something stopping it, some dramatic change, it keeps rolling downhill. Everything moves from order to chaos. And that's just the law of thermodynamics. From order to chaos. It's going to happen. And this players not playing in bowl games is just the tip of the iceberg, and players making decisions about themselves and for themselves. They benefit from the team their entire career. Now, Kirby Smart was supposedly better than Mark Richt, right, James? Their record through 3 years is 32-8 for Mark Richt and 32-10 for Kirby Smart. Okay, you get that, 32-8, 32-10. Well, does DeAndre Baker make a difference in that game? Probably so. He may be a difference maker in that game. Well, Kirby Smart, now 3 years in, he's 11-3 in his third year. So was Mark Richt. They were 13-1, both of them respectively. 13-1 and 13-2 with Richt and Smart last year in year two, and 8-4 and 8-5. Same thing. But this guy has benefited from being a part of that team. But when his team needed him, he thought of himself first. That's the concern there. You benefit from the team, then you quit on your team or you don't finish with your team. And I'm not saying I disagree or agree. I'm just saying if you make that choice, there should be consequences. And right now there are no consequences to those players making that choice. I want to close out with my thinking out loud wrap up. Tim Worley was speaking, wrote an article, and it's really, really good. And Tim Worley is a guy, if you don't know, he's a former Georgia player, number 1 overall draft pick, tough running back. I played with him when I was with the Steelers up there for that brief moment. And he's a guy who made some mistakes. And he says, I'm not talking about this from a sanctimonious high point. I'm talking about someone whose character failed when everybody started telling me I was going to be a millionaire. And he calls it Uncle Tim's wisdom for these guys who are not playing in the bowl game or not finishing. Compete every game, no exceptions ever. Win games you're supposed to win. That means all of them. Enough with the trying hard crap. You're there to win, so do it. Get off social media before ball games. Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. Say what you have to say with 60 minutes of dominant play. Stop whining about where you're not and commit to where you are. You didn't make it to the playoffs. You made it to the Sugar Bowl. Your job was to play like your life depended on it in the Sugar Bowl. And then one more thing he said was take a page from Nick Chubb and Sony Michel's book, Big Team, Little Me. And then he posts a picture of a shirt that they used to wear at Georgia. And it had team on it in really big letters, and then it had me in 2 small letters underneath. You can find the word me in team, but team is misspelled. And there is no I in team, but there's a lot of I in the kids that's playing today. Guys, if they helped you get there, maybe you ought to help them win their last game and be there for your team. That's just my thoughts on it. But where does it stop, James? When the games become meaningless, how far will that go? How many guys are going to start sitting out regular season games because their team has a losing record?